Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garrett. Pyotr Petrovich had had occasion that morning to realize some 5% bonds, and now he sat down to the table and counted over bundles of notes. Andrei Semyonovich, who hardly ever had any money, walked about the room pretending to himself to look at all those banknotes with indifference and even contempt. Nothing would have convinced Pyotr Petrovich that Andrei Semyonovich could really look on the money unmoved, and the latter, on his side, kept thinking bitterly that Pyotr Petrovich was capable of entertaining such an idea about him, and was, perhaps, glad of the opportunity of teasing his young friend by reminding him of his inferiority and the great difference between them. He found him incredibly inattentive and irritable, though he, Andrei Semyonovich, began enlarging on his favorite subject, the foundation of a new special commune. The brief remarks that dropped from Pyotr Petrovich between the clicking of the beads on the reckoning frame betrayed unmistakable and discourteous irony. But the humane Andrei Semyonovich ascribed Pyotr Petrovich's ill humor to his recent breach with Donya, and he was burning with impatience to discourse on that theme. He had something progressive to say on the subject, which might console his worthy friend and could not fail to promote his development. There is some sort of festivity being prepared at the windows, isn't there? Pyotr Petrovich asked suddenly, interrupting Andrei Semyonovich at the most interesting passage. Why, don't you know? Why, I was telling you last night what I think about all such ceremonies. And she invited you too, I heard. You were talking to her yesterday. I should never have expected that beggarly fool would have spent on this feast all the money she got from that other fool, Raskolnikov. I was surprised just now as I came through at the preparations there. The wines. Several people are invited. It's beyond everything, continued Pyotr Petrovich, who seemed to have some object in pursuing the conversation. What? You say I am asked too? When was that? I don't remember, but I shan't go. Why should I? I only said a word to her in passing yesterday of the possibility of her obtaining a year's salary as a destitute widow of a government clerk. I suppose she has invited me on that account, hasn't she? I don't intend to go either, said Lebeziatnikov. I should think not. After giving her a thrashing, you might well hesitate. Who thrashed whom? Cried Lebeziatnikov, flustered and blushing. Why, you thrashed Katerina Ivanovna a month ago. I heard so yesterday. So that's what your convictions amount to. And the woman question, too, wasn't quite sound. And Pyotr Petrovich, as though comforted, went back to clicking his beads. It's all slander and nonsense, cried Lebeziatnikov, who was always afraid of allusions to the subject. It was not like that at all. It was quite different. You've heard it wrong. It's a libel. I was simply defending myself. She rushed at me first with her nails. She pulled out all my whiskers. It's permissible for anyone, I should hope, to defend himself, and I never allow anyone to use violence to me on principle, for it's an act of despotism. What was I to do? I simply pushed her back. Luzahin went on laughing maliciously. You keep on like that because you are out of humor yourself. But that's nonsense, and it has nothing whatever to do with the woman question. You don't understand. I used to think, indeed, that if women are equal to men in all respects, even in strength, as is maintained now. There ought to be equality in that too. Of course, I reflected afterwards that such a question ought not to really to arise, for there ought not to be fighting, and in the future society, fighting is unthinkable, and that it would be a queer thing to seek for equality in fighting. I am not so stupid though. Of course, there is fighting. There won't be later, but at present there is. Confound it. How muddled one gets with you. It's not on that account that I'm not going. I'm not going on principle, not to take part in the revolting convention of memorial dinners. That's why. Though of course one might go to laugh at it. I'm sorry, there won't be any priests at it. I should certainly go if there were. Then you would sit down at another man's table and insult it and those who invited you. Eh? Certainly not insult, but protest. I should do it with a good object. I might indirectly assist the cause of enlightenment and propaganda. It's a duty of every man to work for enlightenment and propaganda, and the more harshly, perhaps the better. I might drop a seed, an idea, and something might grow up from that seed. How should I be insulting them? They might be offended at first, but afterwards they'd see I'd done them a service. You know, Terebayeva, who is in the community now, was blamed because when she left her family and devoted herself, she wrote to her father and mother that she wouldn't go on living conventionally and was entering on a free marriage, and it was said that that was too harsh, that she might have spared them and have written more kindly. I think that's all nonsense, and there's no need of softness. On the contrary, what's wanted is protest. Had been married 7 years, she abandoned her two children. She told her husband straight out in a letter, I have realized that I cannot be happy with you. I can never forgive you that you had deceived me by concealing from me that there is another organization of society by means of the communities. I have only lately learned it from a great hearted man to whom I have given myself and with whom I am establishing a community. I speak plainly because I consider it dishonest to deceive you. Do as you think best. Do not hope to get me back. You are too late. I hope you will be happy. That's how letters like that ought to be written. Is that Bayava, the one you said had made a third free marriage? No, it's only the second, really. But what if it were the fourth? What if it were the 15th? That's all nonsense. And if ever I regretted the death of my father and mother, it is now, and I sometimes think if my parents were living, what a protest I would have aimed at them. I would have done something on purpose. I would have shown them. I would have astonished them. I am really sorry there is no one. To surprise. Well, be that as you will. Pyotr Petrovitch interrupted. But tell me this. Do you know the dead man's daughter? The delicate looking little thing? It's true what they say about her, isn't it? What of it? I think that is. It is my own personal conviction that this is the normal condition of women. Why not? I mean, distinct ones. In our present society, it is not altogether normal, but it is compulsory. But in the future society, it will be perfectly normal because it will be voluntary. Even as it is, she was quite right. She was suffering, and that was her asset, so to speak, her capital, which she had a perfect right to dispose of. Of course, in the future society, there will be no need of assets, but her part will have another significance, rational and in harmony with her environment. As to Sofia Semyonovna, personally, I regard her action as a vigorous protest against the organization of society, and I respect her deeply for it. I rejoice indeed when I look at her. I was told that you got her turned out of these lodgings. Lebeziatnikov was enraged. That's another slander, he yelled. It was not so at all. That was all Katerina Ivanova's intention, for she did not understand, and I never made love to Sofya Semyonova. I was simply developing her, entirely disinterestedly, trying to rouse her to protest. All I wanted was her protest, and Sofya Semyonova could not have remained here anyway. Have you asked her to join your community? You keep on laughing and very inappropriately. Allow me to tell you, you don't understand. There is no such role in a community. The community is established that there should be no such roles. In a community, such a role is essentially transformed, and what is stupid here is sensible there. What under present conditions is unnatural becomes perfectly natural in the community. It all depends on the environment. It's all the environment, and man himself is nothing. And I am on good terms with Sofia Semyonova to this day, which is a proof that she never regarded me as having wronged her. I'm trying now to attract her to the community, but on quite a different footing. What are you laughing at? We are trying to establish a community of our own, a special one, on a broader basis. We have gone further in our convictions. We reject more. And meanwhile, I am still developing Sofia Semyonova. She has a beautiful character. And you take advantage of her fine character, eh? No, no, oh no, on the contrary. Oh no, on the contrary, a queer thing to say. Believe me, why should I disguise it? In fact, I feel it strange myself how timid, chaste, and modern she is with me. And you, of course, are developing her, trying to prove to her that all that modesty is nonsense. Not at all, not at all. How coarsely, how stupidly. Excuse me saying so. You misunderstand the word development. Good heavens, how crude you still are. We are striving for the freedom of women, and you have only one idea in your head. Setting aside the general question of chastity and feminine modesty as useless in themselves and indeed prejudices. I fully accept her chastity with me because that's for her to decide. Of course, if she were to tell me herself that she wanted me, I should think myself very lucky because I like the girl very much. But as it is, no one has ever treated her more courteously than I, with more respect for her dignity. I wait in hopes, that's all. You had much better make her a present of something. I bet you never thought of that. You don't understand, as I've told you already. Of course, she is in such a position, but it's another question. Quite another question. You simply despise her, seeing a fact which you mistakenly consider deserving of contempt. You refuse to take a humane view of a fellow creature. You don't know what a character she is. I am only sorry that of late she has quite given up reading and borrowing books. I used to lend them to her. I am sorry too that with all the energy and resolution in protesting, which she has already shown once, she has little self reliance, little, so to say, independence, so as to break free from certain prejudices and certain foolish ideas. Yet she thoroughly understands some questions, for instance, about kissing of hands, that is, that it's an insult to a woman for a man to kiss her hand because it's a sign of inequality. We had a debate about it and I described it to her. She listened attentively to an account of the workmen's associations in France too. Now I am explaining the question of coming into the room in the future society. And what's that, pray? We had a debate lately on the question: has a member of the community the right to enter another member's room, whether man or woman, at any time? And we decided that he has. It might be at an inconvenient moment. Lebeziatnikov was really angry. You are always thinking of something unpleasant, he cried with aversion. You fool! How vexed I am that when I was expounding our system, I referred prematurely to the question of personal privacy. It's always a stumbling block to people like you. They turn it into ridicule before they understand it. And how proud they are of it. You fools! I've often maintained that the question should not be approached by a novice till he has a firm faith in the system. And tell me, please, what do you find so shameful in cesspools? I should be the first to be ready to clean out any cesspool you like. And it's not a question of self sacrifice, it's simply work. Honorable, useful work which is as good as any other and much better than the work of Raphael and Pushkin because it is more useful and more honorable. More honorable, eh? What do you mean by more honorable? I don't understand such expressions to describe human activity. More honorable, nobler. All those old fashioned prejudices which I reject. Everything which is of use to mankind is honorable. I only understand one word: useful. You can snigger as much as you like, but that's so. Pyotr Petrovich laughed heartily. He had finished counting the money and was putting it away. But some of the notes he left on the table. The cesspool question had already been a subject of dispute between them. What was absurd was that it made Lebeziatnikov really angry, while it amused Luzahin, and at that moment he particularly wanted to anger his young friend. It's your ill luck yesterday that makes you so ill humored and annoying, blurted out Zyatnikov, who, in spite of his independence and his protests, did not venture to oppose Pyotr Petrovich and still behaved to him with some of the respect habitual in early years. You'd better tell me this, Pyotr Petrovich interrupted with haughty displeasure. Can you? Or rather, are you really friendly enough with that young person to ask her to step in here for a minute? I think they've all come back from the cemetery. I heard the sound of steps. I want to see her, that young person. What for? Lebeziatnikov asked with surprise. Oh, I want to. I'm leaving here today or tomorrow, and therefore I wanted to speak to her about. However, you may to be present during the interview. It's better you should be indeed, for there's no knowing what you might imagine. I shan't imagine anything. I only asked, and if you've anything to say to her, nothing is easier than to call her in. I'll go directly, and you may be sure I won't be in your way. 5 minutes later, Lebeziatnikov came in with Sonia. She came in very much surprised and overcome with shyness as usual. She was always shy in such circumstances and was always afraid of new people. She had been as a child and was even more so now. Pyotr Petrovich met her politely and affably, but with a certain shade of bantering familiarity, which, in his opinion, was suitable for a man of his respectability and weight in dealing with a creature so young and so interesting as she. He hastened to reassure her and made her sit down facing him at the table. Sonia sat down, looked about her at Lebeziatnikov, at the notes lying on the table, and then again at Pyotr Petrovich, and her eyes remained riveted on him. Lebeziatnikov was moving to the door. Pyotr Petrovich signed to Sonia to remain seated and stopped Lebeziatnikov. Is Raskolnikov in there? Has he come? He asked him in a whisper. Raskolnikov, yes, why? Yes, he is there. I just saw him come in. Why? Well, I particularly beg you to remain here with us and not to leave me alone with this young woman. I only want a few words with her, but God knows what they may make of it. I shouldn't like Raskolnikov to repeat anything. You understand what I mean. I understand. Lebeziatnikov saw the point. Yes, you are right, of course. I'm convinced, personally, that you have no reason to be uneasy. But still, you are right. Certainly, I'll stay. I'll stand here at the window and not be in your way. I think you're right. Pyotr Petrovich returned to sofa, sat down opposite Sonia, looked attentively at her, and assumed an extremely dignified, even severe expression, as much as to say, "Don't you make any mistake, madame." Sonia was overwhelmed with embarrassment. In the first place, Sofia Semyonovna, will you make my excuses to your respected mamma? That's right, isn't it? Katerina Ivanova stands in the place of a mother to you. Pyotr Petrovich began with great dignity, though affably. It was evident that his intentions were friendly. Quite so, yes, the place of a mother, Sonia answered timidly and hurriedly. Then will you make my apologies to her? Through inevitable circumstances, I am forced to be absent and shall not be at the dinner in spite of your mamma's kind invitation. Yes, I'll tell her at once. And Sonia hastily jumped up from her seat. Wait, that's not all. Pyotr Petrovich detained her, smiling at her simplicity and ignorance of good manners. And you know me little, my dear Sofia Semyonovna. If you suppose I would have ventured to trouble a person like you for a matter of so little consequence affecting myself only, I have another object. Sonia sat down hurriedly. Her eyes rested again for an instant on the grey and rainbow colored notes that remained on the table, and she quickly looked away and fixed her eyes on Pyotr Petrovich. She felt it horribly indecorous, especially for her, to look at another person's money. She started at the gold eyeglass which Pyotr Petrovich held in his left hand, and at the massive and extremely handsome ring with the yellow stone on the middle finger. But suddenly she looked away and, not knowing where to turn, ended by staring Pyotr Petrovich again straight in the face. After a pause of still greater dignity, he continued. I had a chance yesterday in passing to exchange a couple of words with Katerina Ivanova. Poor woman. That was sufficient to enable me to ascertain that she is in a position preternatural, if one may so express it. Yes, preternatural, Sonia hurriedly assented. Or it would be simpler and more comprehensible to say ill. Yes, simpler and more comprehend. Yes, ill. Quite so. So then, from a feeling of humanity and, so to speak, compassion, I should be glad to be of service to her in any way, foreseeing her unfortunate position. I believe the whole of this poverty stricken family depends now entirely on you. Allow me to ask. Sonia rose to her feet. Did you say something to her yesterday of the possibility of a pension? Because she told me that you had undertaken to get her one. Was that true? Not in the slightest, and indeed, it's an absurdity. I merely hinted at her obtaining temporary assistance as the widow of an official who had died in the service. If only she has patronage. But apparently, your late parent had not served his full term and had not indeed been in the service at all of late. In fact, if there could be any hope, it would be very ephemeral because there would be no claim for assistance in that case. Far from it. And she is dreaming of a pension already. A go ahead lady. Yes, she is. For she is credulous and good hearted, and she believes everything from the goodness of her heart. And, and, and she is like that. Yes, you must excuse her, said Sonia, and again she got up to go. But you haven't heard what I have to say. No, I haven't heard, muttered Sonia. Then sit down. She was terribly confused. She sat down again a third time. Seeing her position with her unfortunate little ones, I should be glad, as I have said before, so far as lies in my power to be of service. That is, so far as is in my power, not more. One might, for instance, get up a subscription for her, or a lottery, something of a sort, such as is always arranged in such cases by friends or even outsiders, desirous of assisting people. It was of that I intended to speak to you. It might be done. Yes, yes, God will repay you for it, faltered Sonia, gazing intently at Pyotr Petrovitch. It might be, but we will talk of it later. We might begin it today. We will talk it over this evening and lay the foundation, so to speak. Come to me at 7 o'clock. Mr. Lebeziatnikov, I hope, will assist us. But there is one circumstance of which I ought to warn you beforehand, and for which I venture to trouble you. Sofia Semyonova, to come here. In my opinion, money cannot be, indeed, it's unsafe to put it into Katerina Ivanova's own hands. The dinner today is a proof of that, though she has not, so to speak, a crust of bread for tomorrow, and well, boots or shoes or anything. She has bought today Jamaica rum, and even, I believe, Madeira and coffee. I saw it as I passed through. Tomorrow it will all fall upon you again. They won't have a crust of bread. It's absurd, really, and so to my thinking, a subscription ought to be raised so that the unhappy widow should not know of the money, but only you, for instance. Am I right? I don't know. This is only today, once in her life. She was so anxious to do honor, to celebrate the memory. And she is very sensible. But just as you think, and I shall be very, they will all be, and God will reward. And the orphans. Sonia burst into tears. Very well then, keep it in mind, and now will you accept for the benefit of your relation the small sum that I am able to spare from me personally? I am very anxious that my name should not be mentioned in connection with it. Here, having so to speak anxieties of my own, I cannot do more. And Pyotr Petrovitch held out to Sonia a 10 ruble note, carefully unfolded. She took it, flushed crimson, jumped up, muttered something, and began taking leave. Pyotr Petrovitch accompanied her ceremoniously to the door. She got out of the room at last, agitated and distressed, and returned to Katerina Ivanovna overwhelmed in confusion. All this time, Lebeziatnikov had stood at the window or walked about the room, anxious not to interrupt the conversation. When Sonia had gone, he walked up to Pyotr Petrovitch and solemnly held out his hand. I heard and saw everything, he said, laying stress on the last verb. That is honorable, I mean to say. It's humane. You wanted to avoid gratitude, I saw, and although I cannot, I confess in principle, sympathize with private charity. For it is not only fails to eradicate evil, but even promotes it. Yet I must admit that I saw your action with pleasure. Yes, yes, I like it. That's all nonsense, muttered Pyotr Petrovitch, somewhat disconcerted, looking carefully at Lebeziatnikov. No, it's not nonsense. A man who has suffered distress and annoyance as you did yesterday, and who yet can sympathize with the misery of others. Such a man, even though he is making a social mistake, is still deserving of respect. I did not expect it indeed of you, Pyotr Petrovich, especially as according to your ideas. Oh, what a drawback your ideas are to you. How distressed you are, for instance, by your ill luck yesterday, cried the simple hearted Lebeziatnikov, who felt a return of affection for Pyotr Petrovich. And what do you want with marriage? With legal marriage, my dear, noble Pyotr Petrovich. Why do you cling to this legality of marriage? Well, you may beat me if you like, but I am glad, positively glad it hasn't come off, that you are free, that you are not quite lost for humanity. You see, I've spoken my mind because I don't want in your free marriage to be made a fool of and to bring up another man's children. That's why I want legal marriage, Luzahin replied in order to make some answer. He seemed preoccupied by something. Children? You referred to children. Lebeziatnikov started off like a war horse at the trumpet call. Children are a social question and a question of first importance, I agree. But the question of children has another solution. Some refuse to have children altogether because they suggest the institution of family. We'll speak of children later, but now, as to the question of honor, I confess that's my weak point. That horrid military Pushkin expression is unthinkable in the dictionary of the future. What does it mean? Indeed, it's nonsense. There will be no deception in a free marriage. That is only the natural consequence of a legal marriage, so to say. It's corrective, a protest, so that indeed it's not humiliating. So, if I were to suppose an absurdity were to be legally married, I should be positively glad of it. I should say to my wife, my dear, hitherto, I have loved you. Now I respect you, for you've shown you can protest. You laugh. That's because you are of incapable of getting away from prejudices. Confound it all. I understand now where the unpleasantness is of being deceived in a legal marriage, but it's simply a despicable consequence of a despicable position in which both are humiliated. When the deception is open, as in a free marriage, then it does not exist. It's unthinkable. Your wife will only prove how she respects you by considering you incapable of opposing her happiness and avenging yourself on her for her new husband. Damn it all. I sometimes dream if I were to be married. I mean, if I were to marry, legally or not, it's just the same. I should present my wife with a lover if she had not found one for herself. My dear, I should say, I love you, but even more than I desire you to respect me. See, am I not right? Pyotr Petrovich sniggered as he listened, but without much merriment. He hardly heard it indeed. He was preoccupied with something else, and even Lebeziatnikov at last noticed it. Pyotr Petrovich seemed excited and rubbed his hands. Lebeziatnikov remembered all this and reflected upon it afterwards. Chapter 2. It would be difficult to explain exactly what could have originated the idea of that senseless dinner in Katerina Ivanova's disordered brain. Nearly 10 of the 20 rubles given by Raskolnikov for Marmeladov's funeral were wasted upon it. Possibly Katerina Ivanova felt obliged to honor the memory of the deceased suitably, that all the lodgers and still more Amalia Ivanova might know that he was in no way their inferior and perhaps very much their superior, and that no one had the right to turn up his nose at him. Perhaps the chief element was that peculiar poor man's pride, which compels many poor people to spend their last savings on some traditional social ceremony simply in order to do like other people and not to be looked down upon. It is very probable, too, that Katerina Ivanova longed on this occasion at the moment when she seemed to be abandoned by everyone, to show those wretched, contemptible lodgers that she knew how to do things, how to entertain, and that she had been brought up in a genteel, she might almost say aristocratic colonel's family, and had not been meant for sweeping floors and washing the children's rags at night. Even the poorest and most broken spirited people are sometimes liable to these paroxysms of pride and vanity, which take the form of an irresistible nervous craving. And Katerina Ivanova was not broken spirited. She might have been killed by circumstance, but her spirit could not have been broken. That is, she could not have been intimidated. Her will could not be crushed. Moreover, Sonia had said with good reason that her mind was unhinged. She could not be said to be insane, but for a year past she had been so harassed that her mind might well be overstrained. The later stages of consumption are apt, doctors tell us, to affect the intellect. There was no great variety of wines, nor was there Madeira, but wine there was. There was vodka, rum, and Lisbon wine, all of the poorest quality but in sufficient quantity. Besides the traditional rice and honey, there were 3 or 4 dishes, one of which consisted of pancakes, all prepared in Amalia Ivanova's kitchen. 2 samovars were boiling, that tea and punch might be offered after dinner. Katerina Ivanova had herself seen to purchasing the provisions with the help of one of the lodgers, an unfortunate little Pole who had somehow been stranded at Madame Pevishel's. He promptly put himself at Katerina Ivanova's disposal and had been all that morning and all the day before running about as fast as his legs could carry him, and very anxious that everyone should be aware of it. For every trifle he ran to Katerina Ivanova, even hunting her out at the bazaar. At every instant called her Panny. She was heartily sick of him before the end, though she had declared at first that she could not have got on without this serviceable and magnanimous man. It was one of Katerina Ivanova's characteristics to paint everyone she met in the most glowing colors. Her praises were so exaggerated as sometimes to be embarrassing. She would invent various circumstances to the credit of her new acquaintance and quite genuinely believe in their reality. Then all of a sudden she would be disillusioned and would rudely and contemptuously repulse the person she had only a few hours before been literally adoring. She was naturally of a gay, lively, and peace loving disposition, but from continual failures and misfortunes, she had come to desire so keenly that all should live in peace and joy and should not dare to break the peace, that the slightest jar, the smallest disaster reduced her almost to frenzy, and she would pass in an instant from the brightest hopes and fancies to cursing her fate and raving and knocking her head against the wall. Amalia Ivanova, too, suddenly acquired extraordinary importance in Katerina Ivanova's eyes and was treated by her with extraordinary respect, probably only because Amalia Ivanova had thrown herself heart and soul into the preparations. She had undertaken to lay the table, to provide them the linen, crockery, etc., and to cook the dishes in her kitchen. And Katerina Ivanova had left it all in her hands and gone herself to the cemetery. Everything had been well done. Even the tablecloth was nearly clean. The crockery, knives, forks, and glasses were, of course, of all shapes and patterns, lent by different lodgers, but the table was properly laid at the time fixed, and Amalia Ivanova, feeling she had done her work well, had put on a black silk dress and a cap with new mourning ribbons and met the returning party with some pride. This pride, though justifiable, displeased Katerina Ivanova for some reason, as though the table could not have been laid except by Amalia Ivanova. She disliked the cap with new ribbons too. Could she be stuck up? The stupid German, because she was mistress of the house and had consented as a favor to help her poor lodgers. As a favor? Fancy that! Katerina Ivanova's father, who had been a colonel and almost a governor, had sometimes had the table set for 40 persons. And then, anyone like Amalia Ivanova, or rather, Ludvigovna, would not have been allowed into the kitchen. Katerina Ivanova, however, put off expressing her feelings for a time and contented herself with treating her coldly, though she decided inwardly that she would certainly have to put Amalia Ivanova down and set her in her proper place, for goodness only knew what she was fancying herself. Katerina Ivanova was irritated too by the fact that hardly any of the lodgers invited had come to the funeral except the Pole, who had just managed to run into the cemetery, while to the memorial dinner the poorest and most insignificant of them had turned up. The wretched creatures, many of them not quite sober, the older and more respectable of them, as if by common consent, stayed away. Pyotr Petrovitch Luzahin, for instance, who might be said to be the most respectable of all the lodgers, did not appear, though Katerina Ivanova had the evening before told all the world, that is, Amalia Ivanova, Polenka, Sonia, and the Pole, that he was the most generous, noble hearted man, with a large property and vast connections, who had been a friend of her first husband's and a guest in her father's house, and that he had promised to use all his influence to secure her a considerable pension. It must be noted that when Katerina Ivanova exalted anyone's connections and fortune, it was without any ulterior motive, quite disinterestedly, for the mere pleasure of adding to the consequence of the person praised, probably taking his cue from Luzahin. That contemptible wretched Lebeziatnikov had not turned up either. What did he fancy himself? He was only asked out of kindness and because he was sharing the same room with Pyotr Petrovitch and was a friend of his, so that it would have been awkward not to invite him.